What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office. It is a cold and gray February day here in Central Oregon. You might be able to hear the heaters running in the background. Yeah, it's chilly in here. So I just got in, so I'm trying to warm the place up. Figured I would burn out one of these because it's been a few weeks. The last couple of weeks had stuff going on. King of the Hammers, I did not go, but I watched it on the TV that I hung up here. Yeah, I have strong feelings about TVs in the shops, and generally they are the kiss of death when it comes to productivity. People want to just, you just glance over at it and then you start watching it. And then before long, you realize you've been standing there for 4.5 minutes with your mouth open, watching whatever is on the TV. And it just, stuff doesn't get done. So I don't normally like having a TV in the shop, but I did put a TV up so that we could watch the races over the last few weeks. And it was good. People came by, had some snacks, good conversation. It was good. Racing was good. So that's why I did not have the time to do a couple of podcasts. So anyway, I appreciate everybody hanging out. Appreciate coming by. I think this episode I'm going to talk about a really common, misconception in the international world, and that is parts interchangeability. A lot of people think that the same parts work across the same platforms, and that's not all entirely true. But I just want to say thanks to everybody that donates on Patreon and through the Instagram subscriptions and things like that. The Patreon is nice because you can donate whatever dollar amount you want, and it's monthly. So I appreciate everybody. These things don't pay for themselves, so I have to pay for them out of pocket. So the Patreon donations help quite a bit. So appreciate everybody that spends money there, and I'm gonna keep making these things as long as I can. But anyway, interchangeability. There are certain things that work across the platforms. And when I say platforms, I mean trucks, Travelalls, Scouts, some medium duty, that kind of thing. Like, there are some 6-cylinder engines from the 50s that were used in tractors and trucks. And there were different, how they were attached, how they mounted up, the way they went into the trucks and stuff is different than how they were in the tractor. But the internals are similar, bearings, bearing kits, pistons, stuff like that were the same. So there are some interchangeability there. But again, you're not just buying tractor parts and putting them in your truck all the time. Like the water pumps are different. On the 6-cylinder stuff, the tractor water pump has a longer snout on it than the trucks. And so you have to have a adapter or whatever, or maybe it's the other way around. Sorry. Trucks have a longer snout than the tractors. So if you want to run the tractor water pump, you got to make a spacer, push the pulley out, and then you bolt your fan to that. So for example, there is interchangeability to an extent. When you get into the V8 stuff, there is a lot of internals are the same, but like the Scout oil pan is different than the truck oil pan. And so then that means the oil pump is different than between the Scout and the truck. People don't realize that. And so then they buy a 345 out of a pickup, then they go to put it in their Scout, and then the oil pan hits the front axle and they go, oh, geez. So then they buy an oil pan, and then after they get the oil pan, then they realize that they need an oil pump, and then they realize that the dipstick is different, and it just is this funny snowball. I looked at a Scout the other day that had a pickup engine in it, and it had the oil filler at the front of the motor on the stand like they did in the 60s. And then it also had the oil fill valve cover. So 2 different places you could put oil in it at. And I thought that was funny. So again, yeah, you can take a 345 out of a pickup and put it in a Scout, but you need the oil pan, the oil pump, the oil pickup, the dipstick tube, that sort of stuff. And then the pulleys are different. The power steering pump on a Scout runs off the crank, whereas on the pickup, it runs off the back of the water pump. So little differences like that. So again, you have to you can't assume that international is international. And I get this all the time because people call like a 3/4 ton pickup. I hear all the time people go, "Oh, that's one of them Scout pickups." People thought, or it just became a thing where there was no such thing as international. They just became known as Scout, which is, and nowadays with the new Volkswagen re-release, you've got Scout motors. So that even adds to the confusion a little bit more. But back in the day, people just started calling them Scouts, and there's like the Scout 80s and 800s, people just called baby Scouts, which that's one of my biggest pet peeves ever. Is when guys call and they go, "I got one of them baby Scouts and I'm trying to buy this." It's like, is it an 80 or an 800? Well, I don't know. It's a little one. I'm like, okay, well, you're gonna have to figure out what it is because there's differences. Speaking of 80s and 800s, you see it all the time where a guy has an 80 and he wants roll up windows. So he goes and he finds doors from an 800, which are shaped the same, fit the hole the same. And then they realize after the fact that the latch mechanisms are different and the door striker setup is different. And so then it requires a whole bunch of fabrication to change your pillar to the 800 style of striker versus the 80 style of latch that you had before. So I get that a lot. Guys calling, "I bought 800 doors not knowing, and now I need 80 doors. So I'm like, yeah, sorry. 3CE, you see that a lot. Transmissions, the Scout ones will have a mount on them a lot of times, whereas the pickup and Travelall ones won't have a mount. So if you're buying a pickup transmission to put in your Scout, it's not going to work. But the other way around is you can put a Scout transmission in a pickup, a two-wheel drive Scout setup, because the mount doesn't matter. It just hangs out in space. But you can't put a 4-wheel drive Scout transmission and transfer case in a truck or Travelall because there's an engine crossmember that's in the way of the front output. So you run into issues like that. Interchangeability. What else is there? Brake parts. The Scout 2, the early Scout 2s had smaller drums than the later Scout 2s. So you can change the rear drums and brake set assemblies on a 72 to 75 half ton with the 73 to 80 Scout 2. Those are interchangeable, but you've got to watch what you're getting. 69 to 72, they had, narrower drums and sometimes big, they'd be 12 by 1.75 inches, where Scouts were 11 by 2 and then 11 by 2.25. So if you're trying to interchange parts like that, you got to make sure you get your years right. Interior wise on the Scouts, the gauges between the C series 63 to 68 and Scout 800s 66 to 71, they are both round. They both have orange needles and they both look similar, but they have different backgrounds. They have different faces, they call them sometimes. The Scouts had a dark gray background the whole time, where C-Series trucks and Travelalls had a silver, they had a gold, and they had a different kind of gray. So again, you've got to be careful what you're getting and pay a lot of attention to that stuff, because you end up, and it comes in here all the time. I get an 800 that'll come in with like one gold gauge. I'm like, oh, you got that out of a pickup or, something else. So keep that in mind. The steering wheel diameter is different between the 80, 800s and the C series, even though they look the same. So that's different. Power steering setups. The 68 power steering is different than the 69. And even then, the 72 to 75 power steering setup is different than the previous one. So yeah, you might bolt on, but the brackets are different. Things are different there. Chassis between the C and D series, they're very similar. The axles will bolt back and forth between the two because the spring spacing is the same and whatnot. But over the years, they change shape a little bit. They have holes in different places where they didn't have holes. The trailer hitch mounting in the back, the C series doesn't have any real provisions for class 3, class 4 hitch, where the D series does. That sort of stuff. There's just different, they just made improvements over the years, and you don't really realize it because everyone just on the internet goes, oh, they're all the same. Oh, you just bolt that to this and bolt that onto that. And most of the people on Facebook and the Facebook groups have never done it themselves. They're just regurgitating what they read on Binder Bulletin or Binder Planet or whatever. And they don't know, but they're sure happy to tell you that you're doing it wrong. So yeah, interchangeability like that is, you just have to pay attention to what year you're dealing with. And then same with like the 100s versus the 1010s. Yes, they're both independent, A-arm style front ends, but there's a lot of changes across the board, from the steering, the way the center links and side links are, and the way the steering block bolts on and stuff like that. So you, again, don't fall for that. Oh, they're all the same. This is the same as that. Scout 2 and D series gauges, they look similar. There is some interchangeability. The dash lights won't work the same on some of them. If you get a 4-wheel drive one that has the 4-wheel drive indicator light on it, your Travelall, if it was a 2-wheel drive Travelall or truck, won't have that wiring in it. So you'll have to add the wiring in to make that gauge function like it's supposed to. 79 and 80 Scout 2s had the kilometers on their gauge, and then they had the arrow indicators instead of the bars. So again, if you have a 79 or 80 and you want to keep it as accurate as you can, you can't just grab a D series truck speedometer, because it's not the same. Excuse me. On dash knobs, and it's between the Scout 2 and the D series, those are the same. Headlight switch is the same. Wiper knob, wiper switch is the same. Heater controls are different. Marker lights are the same between the Scout 2s and the D. The thing I did find is the D series used heavy metal marker light housings, and the early Scout 2s did as well. But by, I think, 75, they had gone to plastic housings. So if you really want that more durable, shiny, more lusterful chrome, you want to find those early Scout 2 and D series marker light housings, because they are good metal, shiny chrome and not just chrome plastic. Same with the front signal housings. Those are the same between the Scout 2 and the Ds, the metal ones. When the Scout 2 went to plastics, they changed the lower valance. So it's takes a different size bucket. Same with the rear taillights. The early Scout 2s use the metal housing, and then later Scout 2s and Terras and Travelers use the plastic housing, the kind of the GM style socket setup. So you got to watch your interchangeability on that, because you'll have to rewire, chop wires, and splice in the different styles, whichever one you end up with. Yeah, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Door handles between the Scout 2 and the Ds are the same. The Cs and 800s are different because 800 doors are narrower, so the push rod is different lengths. Just little details like that everything about it is exactly the same except for the length of the rod, or like the lock cylinders. The 800s have a shorter hex on them than the C series or D series do. So you can put a D series lock in an 800, you just have to shorten the hex actuator, but you can't go vice versa. You can't put 800 locks in a D series because it won't reach the mechanism inside the lock actuator. So yeah, just, things like that. You have to be real careful, what people are so quick to say, oh, that's the same. That's the same. That's the same. And there were variations every year. Things were changing. Stuff was updated, and, it's subtle. You don't know it. Like the 74 and 5 hood, grill, and valance is different than the 69 to 73s and will bolt on. You can interchange them back and forth between the models, but you have to change all of the parts. You can't just change the hood, or you can't just change the grill. All the hood, grill, and valance all have to get changed all at once. So, excuse me. So yeah, so there are a lot of subtle differences that the casual international owner will not notice and they won't recognize. So again, you have to be careful who you listen to on the internet and what you're looking for, especially if you have a end of year. If you have a 1980, you're kind of on your own. You're kind of on an island there. If you have a 75 pickup, there's a lot of stuff there that is unique to the 74 and 5s. I always try and tell people if they're looking for a project to restore or to do something, I tell them to go like 73 pickup or Travelall or 74 Scout 2, because those are kind of the most interchangeable, most easily to find parts for, least quirky of all the ones to build. Same with the early Scouts. I'd say like 67, 68, 800s, because it still shared more parts with the 80, like the turn signal housings are the same as the 80s, that kind of thing. Or in the C series, I like 66. If I was going to restore from, go search out one, a 66 C series would be what I would want, because of again, it shares the most between the 63s, 4s, 5s, 67 and 8s. They were trying to make them fancy and modernize them, so they look similar, but there's, the different grill and the different headlight rings and, just stuff like that. So again, mild interchangeability, but if you're trying to build something with the most opportunity, that's what I would look for. Yeah, man, that's about all I can think of right now. I'm sure something will hit me. Oh, 80 and 800s. They have different sized side glass in the top across the years. They got larger and larger as the models progressed. So, you'll see that sometimes an 800 top, like a 71 800B top on a 66, and you can tell because the windows are way bigger than what they're supposed to be for a 66. So again, just stuff like that. Try not to take it for granted. Try not to put too much stock in what the internet says, and just do your homework. Anyway, I appreciate everybody. Thank you for listening. Thanks for following along. I'll talk to you next week. And until then, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.